Thank you. Thanks all for being here, and welcome to CEE's second Energy Technology Forum. We are really excited to be here and to have you all here. I'm Jenny Edwards. I'm the director of the Innovation Exchange at CEE. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Happy Election Day. If you haven't voted already, go vote. I hear that people with an I voted sticker get a free drink ticket. And you also get one if you don't have that, but you know, you get bonus points. So I'm just going to kind of quickly set us up and then move us on to the content. But so this is a technology panel. This is really where CE gets excited. We sort of are fundamentally a technology company. We like to get our hands dirty in the field with kind of how things are working. And it's obviously a field that has changed tremendously. I think you'll hear about that. It's the sort of technology component of efficiency has changed certainly since the field's inception. Huge amount since I've been working in this field. It's not been too long, but and then just even if we think about the last 10 years when the iPhones first hit the market, there's just been a huge amount of technological change. And fundamentally, I think this is still really sort of a hardware business. We still are talking about sort of what is installed in homes, what's installed in businesses, our industrial processes. But we are seeing more and more the influence of kind of the software side of things in terms of operations, controls, and communications. So we're kind of right at the cusp of that transition, and I think are really excited to hear from our panel some of their thoughts on that. I want to really thank a few people in particular, but really, so we're hosting this. Many of you know that CEE is the lead on a energy efficiency potential study for the state, and we've got our partners here. We have Seventh Wave here, who's a key partner on that project, as well as others, and we'll be talking about it a little bit more, but really thanks to the Minnesota Department of Commerce for their support of that study, and then through for this event as well. And then also want to thank Midwest Energy News and the U.S. Green Building Council for their support on outreach. Thanks to you both. And of course the Walker Art Center. This is our first time here at the Walker, so it's a beautiful space. I hope, I got a little lost on my way here. I hope the rest of you, clearly you found your way okay. I don't know about these rest of the people that are out there wandering and looking at art, but maybe they're having a good time. So, I'm going to first, Twitter. I always forget to mention the Twitter. There is a hashtag, CEE Forum, hashtag CEE Forum, or hashtag MNCEE, if for those of you who are following along. And please, we hope that you can stay for the happy hour afterwards. Again, free drink ticket. And then we've got some posters of some sort of research and folks who are working in the field sharing their work then. So please take the time to take a look at those and chat with the people. I'm going to invite up CE's president, Chris Dufferin, my boss. One of my favorite people in this field. I told him I was not going to embarrass him too much, but a great colleague, a great person to work for, and he's going to kind of set the tone for the event. So.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. It's great to have so many people interested in this particular CEE, very CEE kind of nerdy topic of technology and energy efficiency. So I think most of you know CEE very well, but I want to give you a glimpse a little bit into how these technology forums really connect to what we do on a daily basis. As Jenny mentioned, we consider ourselves a technology organization at our core. We're interested not in how technology works in a lab or how it works in theory, but how it works in the field and how it works particularly with the interaction with the customer. And it's really the marriage of those two things, the customer and the technology in the field, that inform all of our programs and even inform a lot of our policy work. But our work is at a what I would consider a very critical stage. I mean, energy efficiency has been popular since the 1970s, and we've done a lot of work in it over that course of that time. But it's really moving, particularly in the past 10 years, from a series of technologies and a series of programs into what is now a real industry. Energy efficiency is it's a resource. It's a resource akin to a supply side resource, and I think utilities are beginning to see it that way across the country, as well as states and policymakers. And so thanks to our success, and when I say our success, I don't mean CEE's, I mean all of our success and all the folks who work on energy efficiency here nationwide, load is flattening. Efficiency is meeting our electric load here today. And so what were efficient technologies yesterday are now becoming the standard technologies. And so we're going to have to reach for not just the low-hanging fruit, but a lot of higher-hanging fruit as well as maybe finding new trees altogether in order to make sure energy efficiency remains relevant. And at the same time, with the onset of renewables and the drop in price of renewables, the interaction between efficiency and clean supply sources is going to become even more important. So these are some of the issues we're grappling with right now at CEE, these kind of key strategic issues in energy efficiency, particularly this year. We've done it in a couple of ways. The first I'll just mention is we merged with the Neighborhood Energy Connection, which is a longtime ally of ours and a former employer of mine. We were doing that in part because we wanted to think bigger about our geographic scope and our impact in Minnesota. And in particular, bringing more resources into the residential energy efficiency space where both organizations had a lot of expertise and where technological change is happening very rapidly. And so that's something you're going to hear about today is that technological change in residential energy. The other big opportunity was what Jenny mentioned a moment ago, our DSM potential study. The Department of Commerce Division of Energy Resources chose CEE to lead this potential study. And I realize now it says DMS. You know, it's funny, until you see it in front of you, you don't see those things, but it is not demand management side. I can't even say it that way. It's demand side management. So that's intended to do these three things. We're trying to estimate the statewide potential for natural gas and electricity efficiency, as well as carbon savings potential in Minnesota in the next decade. We are producing actionable data resources that utilities and others can use regarding market sectors, geographical areas, service territories, end uses, measures, and programs. And finally, we have a stakeholder process so that people can participate in this process. And I think that's really the most unique thing about the way we're doing this potential study and is what's going to make it very relevant in the future. This is our team that's working on this study. As I mentioned, we're leading the study. Our biggest roles are in the stakeholder management side, as well as in program design and emerging technologies. But we also have these four excellent organizations working with us. Optimal Energy out of the Northeast that works more on the demand or on the modeling side. Seventh Wave out of Wisconsin. Another great research organization. They're doing work on the market characterization, as well as some work on the behavioral programs. And then ACEEE bringing their knowledge on programs across the country, and eSource as well, which knows a lot about the emerging tech side in particular. So this team, along with as I mentioned, the group of stakeholders that we've put together, and It's a really knowledgeable group of stakeholders, particularly about what's going on in Minnesota and how this data and how this information can then become actionable for them in the coming decade. All of that makes us very optimistic about the outcome of this study. So we thank, again, the Department of Commerce for trusting us with this. So in fact, actually, I should mention this forum is actually part of that engagement process. Even though this is our second technology forum, we're actually using this as an opportunity to introduce some of the ideas from this potential study and raise these issues and get feedback from them. So that leads me to our panel for today. We have assembled a fantastic panel for you of 5 people who are going to provide us with a lot of perspective on energy efficiency technology and program design and the potential for technologies from their standpoint, from what they see in their field in the coming 5 to 10 years. And we're really excited to have this group with us. One thing you may notice about this panel that I would just like to address head on is that they are entirely made up of men. And I wanted to just address that right up front. When we put together this forum, we worked obviously unsuccessfully at creating a gender diverse panel. We made a lot of contact and had a particular emphasis on trying to invite women panelists to join us. And unfortunately, all of those people could not be here today. So here we are. We don't want to run from the issue. We wanted to acknowledge it and acknowledge really that there are still too few women working in this field of energy efficiency technology, and that is in large part a big source of the issue. And so as we move into our program today and think about how technology is driving energy efficiency in the field, we should also think about the future of the next 5 to 10 years of energy efficiency, not just of that technology, but of our workforce. That's going to be a key part, is driving the diversity of our workforce and the opportunities that that is going to create for us as an industry. So with that, I will say I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker, who is not going to be speaking on that particular subject, but will be speaking about the next 5 to 10 years of energy efficiency and technology. So I would like to introduce Tom Ekman. Tom is now retired, or at least mostly retired. He's here with us and doing similar kinds of work. After a 35-year career with the Northwest Power and Conservation Council in a few different leadership roles. And many of the things we've been working on the last 10, 20 years here in Minnesota, Tom has been a national leader on this. And we know this because when we, a number of us who go to conferences, particularly ACEEE conferences, we always seek out sessions or keynotes that Tom has given that have taught us a lot about how energy efficiency and resource planning are interconnected and how they can be interconnected in states, because where Tom comes from in the Northwest, they've been doing this kind of planning for, since 1980, really. As soon as energy efficiency came on the scene, the Northwest was treating energy efficiency as a resource, probably 20 years ahead of most of us. And Tom is really the national leader in that. But we didn't ask Tom to speak about that today. We asked Tom to speak about some of the key technological areas where efficiency will achieve the greatest potential in the next 5 to 10 years to help us start thinking about this. So please join me in welcoming Tom Ekman.
Thank you much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Class. All right, thank you. I hope to entertain you and maybe inform you, we'll find out, over the next few minutes. let's start out with Bob, who's a Minnesota native, and the times are a-changing. He wrote this song many a decade ago, about the time actually before energy efficiency was declared a resource, but it's changing and still is a resource. So let's dig into how things are changing. First, let's start with 25 years ago, when the first era for energy efficiency started in most of the country. Some places a little earlier, some places a little later. There's a couple pictures here of things that you might recognize. The first is Starbucks. They had 165 stores in 1992. They got 2,800 in China alone today. So the reason I show this slide is to get you a sense of change and magnitude along with time. Because those of you who haven't been along this ride don't understand how fast it's been going. And I want to give you a sense of being careful not to get too staid in your existence. So Jay Leno was the first time he showed up as the Tonight Show host was 25 years ago. World Wide Web was 1 year old. 1 year old, right? And in that year, the first photo was uploaded to the web. In the second year of his existence, the first photo. Facebook, creator, was 8 years old, and his entity now loads 200,000 photos a minute up to the web. Motorola introduced its first, handheld phone is a little bit of a misnomer. It weighed 2.5 pounds. It took 8 hours to charge, to run for 30 minutes. Now, you complain about how fast your phone goes down now. Imagine leaning over in a car trying to put that up to your ear. And finally, the CFL cost $18. A little over $30 today's dollars. So that's the magnitude of the change in 2.5 decades. So as we look forward 5 or 10 or 20, keep in mind the pace and the magnitude of some of these underlying modifications to our lives. All right. My forecast for lessons learned after 35 years of trying starts with this. What you're absolutely certain will happen, sometimes doesn't. So I'm going to forecast for you what the next 25 years look like. Keep in mind, sometimes it doesn't turn out that way. Secondly, my predictions, and we'll go through each of these. Behavior-based programs are really going to bring us back to the future. Codes and standards going to make controls the next plastics. We're going to start paying for performance on a going forward basis because of what's trending on Twitter and underlies the basis of Twitter. And we can get rid of deemed savings. They'll be so last decade. And progress will be measured by stock and flow. So keep these in mind as we go through. Those are my major themes. First of all, lesson 2. Because I've been doing this so long, you've got to follow Ekman's laws. All right? This is Nemo doing his thing. Let me give you a little hint about what Ekman's laws are, and we'll walk through them and why. Ohm's law. All right? Many of you engineers out there, so this is a technology forum, particularly electrical side, understand Ohm's law. You can get amps, watts, and volts by a combination of multiplication or division. As a consequence of knowing 2, you can figure out the other one. All right? Well, Ekman's got one too. It's called the efficiency triangle. And it has 3 components. First component, I sub m, is immoral, and it's in units of waste. I sub I, units of illegal, which is time served, because you are convicted in case you're wasting things. And finally, it's unprofitable. That's U sub P in units of money. So this is how they work together. If you want to find immoral, you take unprofitable times the number of years, total time wasted money is the result. If you take and want to find unprofitable, you take waste and divide it by years, and that's the pace of wasting your money, which is important to know. And then finally, if you want to find it's illegal, it's time served for money we wasted. So those are the equations. But the real key here is immoral, unprofitable, and illegal. Those are the keys to successful evaluation. Those are the keys to successful programs. And those are the keys to treating energy efficiency as a resource. Let's step through each one. Immoral. All efficiency programs are intended to change behavior. All of them, from the very beginning. Because if people were doing the right thing, we wouldn't want to change what they were doing. It's just that simple. So all programs, not the new ones that are just behavior-based. We've been running behavior change programs from the beginning. The right and wrong are defined by social norms. The right thing to do is not waste. We know that. Social norm, whoops, let's go back. Immoral behaviors are those things that don't conform to social norms. So we're trying to change people's behavior to not waste. That message has been around since the very beginning. Buy the right light bulb, buy the right motor, buy the right building, buy the right insulation level, and the bad behavior would be not to do that. So, in the future, the message will be a little bit different, but probably not a lot, but we'll have better technology to deliver it. Let's see if we can get this. It's the same message. Ben Franklin had it in Paul Richards' Almanac. But tomorrow, we'll be able to target it better. Why is that? Well, we've got some panelists who will talk a little bit more about this, but big data analytics will improve our understanding about who's not doing the behavior we want done and how to get to them with a message and with a technology that fits their needs. And these entities and others are aimed at doing that. Being able to find the message that resonates with the individual you're trying to target and getting them the energy efficiency technology mix that best suits their individual or group needs. Instead of a mass program, we will target marketing. We know why you're immoral, so we're going to change your behavior. Your behavior, not your next door neighbors. We know specifically why you're doing something immoral. Illegal. There are two parts of illegal. The first is we've got to obey the laws that we're given. We don't control like the first law of thermodynamics or the second. The first law is, of course, you can only break even. The second is you can only break even at absolute zero. And the third, of course, is you can't even reach absolute zero. So there you are. That's the world we're given. Somebody has to enforce these so that we don't get technologies that don't do what they are advertised. In the Northwest, we have the Regional Technical Forum, 30 folks that sit around, men and women, that sit around and adjudicate whether things actually pass muster. And I'm going to give you guys a test that we gave the RTF. So, keeping technology claims legal is the job of the RTF, but in this room, it's your job. And so we have to ask ourselves, why did this technology not pass muster? It starts with a cat and bread with butter on it. Now we know that the cat always lands on its feet, and bread with butter always lands butter side down. All right? We take the bread and we put it on the cat. We let it start to spin, attach a dynamo to it. Voila! Infinite energy. All right, so why didn't this pass? Somebody answer here. Why? You're all engineers, know first law, second dynamics. Why didn't this pass? Because you got to feed the cat. You got to add energy to that system to make it work. So that's a job that you have to have somebody do. Make sure that technology is going to deliver as promised. All right, illegal. We've got to take advantage of the laws that we do control, because we can't take advantage of those that we don't. We just got to administer those. And codes and standards are the first part of that. And, you know, state energy codes define the worst building you can build that's still legal. And so we want to enforce that. Minnesota's doing pretty good along those lines. And the second is we want to move forward on national standards. These are the standards for several, 5 different refrigerators, clothes washers, and freezers that improve at the federal level the underlying technology. And we can control those. And pushing those forward as fast as legitimately possible makes a big difference and we've been successful recently. In fact, Anthony, where are you? There you are. You're probably in there as, I don't know, one of those guys back there. Maybe Captain America. Sure. And Anthony used to work for ASAP, which is the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, who nationally coordinate getting appliance standards through Congress or through the administrative process at the Department of Energy. We've been really successful over the last 8-10 years. Give you some indication of that if the thing goes forward. Here's 1992 to 2016, and these are the numbers of standards adopted each year administratively. 2008, things changed pretty dramatically. We averaged less than one standard a year administrative improvements between 1992 and 2007. In the Obama administration, over 5 a year. 16, well, more than 16 adopted in the final year. Jumped up at the end. Now, this has implications for programs because these are the standards that are going to change in the next 7 years. 23 new standards go into effect over the next decade. They will change the baseline from which you measure performance improvements. They will change the cost effectiveness of measures. They will change the technologies that you can attack by programs. And as a consequence, redesign is in your future. Load forecasts will be lower, particularly over the longer term, medium and long term. Standards impact all units. We have very few programs that get 100% penetration. Standards get 100% penetration. Every new refrigerator has to meet that level of performance. Every new motor, every new circulating pump has to meet that level of performance, not just those that go through programs. So their impacts are much larger, and they basically influence load forecasts in a much bigger way than in the future than do programs. Standards adopted between 2010 and 2015 reduced our load growth from the Northwest from 1.3% a year to 1%, 0.3% reduction on an annual basis. Turns out we got 21 more that we didn't incorporate into that load forecast. We think they might drop the load forecast another 0.3 to 0.4% per annum. That's cutting the load forecast we had almost in half from the standards adopted since 2008. Efficiency potential has got to recognize this. The achievable potential study you have has a brand new baseline. And it will require that we focus our attention on something else besides, for example, the good old CFLs or LEDs that we've been chasing for these many years, which have dominated not just Minnesota's but the nation's DSM achievements, at least half, in some cases over 70% of the program savings have come from some sort of residential commercial lighting. All right, this means we're moving on to controls. Mr. McGuire, who was around 1967, huh? Or saw the movie on TV networks, so there you go. Netflix or Amazon. This is what it goes, right? You remember the scene. He was told the future is plastics. Well, in fact, my take on this, the future is controls, because the widgets are pretty damn deficient, and there's not much room to move. In fact, in the near term, these changes are going to make us focus on other things. There's not a lot of savings left. We pushed the envelope on those federal standards to a level that is almost as far and perhaps further than would be cost effective to pursue in programs, depending on what your avoided cost is. So there's no headroom. We've done what we can. We've got to move from widgets to systems applications in the focus going forward, because the baseline and the technologies we can use will now are, thank goodness, being brought to us by standards. We also have to look at differential in the timed savings of these resources. This is a draft piece of work that we did for the state of Michigan. It looks at 4 different load shapes plus a flat load shape. You call that the exit sign or transformer load losses, no load losses. And it looks at hot water, commercial, residential air conditioning, residential lighting, commercial lighting, and the time differentiated value. That blue part is the energy value. The low part of the bar, the first bar in there, is just the energy value. And the remainder of that, risk, ancillary services, CO2 avoided costs, all that other stuff, that's the capacity value. And in some cases, it's more than double the energy value. In other cases, it adds 20, 25%. This is for Michigan. If you did the same study in Minnesota, it would look a little bit different. The load shapes would be a little bit different, but the answer is roughly the same. We did this for 4 of the locations in the country, 4 of the locations in the country. The answer basically is the same. Residential air conditioning, because it has a huge capacity benefit in the summer, big winner. On the other hand, street lighting or exit signs, not so much. All right, unprofitable. We have had historically 2 strategies to make energy efficiency unprofitable. The first has been sort of the price is right. And we use market transformation in this case to reduce the cost of things, to make CFLs or ductless heat pumps or other new technology come down in cost and be more cost competitive over time. So that's one technique we've used. The second, and I don't want to lose this, regional entities that can improve market transformation activities are going to get a bigger role as a consequence of that, because we need to move upstream to make economic choices more available, and by doing that upstream, we have a lower cost. The second one is this let's make a deal, which is the standard programs. We offer incentives, acquisition payments to customers to take and do the right thing, to make it economic. Finally, learning from what Twitter trends tell us. AMI data and other low-cost centers will permit the development of different ways of getting answers and different ways of providing programs. This will, among other things, provide a choice close to real-time information that we could use to do pay-per-performance with. It allows whole building or utility system performance measurements rather than we did lighting. Now we have to figure out the interaction of that with the HVAC system. We're going to do lighting and HVAC, and we're going to measure at the bus the total building change, and we're going to pay on that basis because we can calibrate all the other things that's going on in the building. Reduce some regulatory risk and lag, and finally, we won't have to deem so many things because we can measure them directly, and more precisely, more accurately, and more timely. The reason Twitter is important here is that some of the technologies, AMI in particular, you can turn on to give you high-resolution data, but you can't deal with it as a stored process. It's terabytes in hours. You need something that can recognize trends in the incoming data rather than deposited in a legacy database and look at before and after in this big database. You need something that can pull information and see that trend coming in. And Twitter has those algorithms. In fact, some of the folks who are developing pay-per-performance techniques are using borrowed code from Twitter. All right, stock data. Tells us what we got out there to retrofit, how many houses, how many refrigerators, how many TVs. Flow data tells us what's coming in. That's how I distinguish it. The reason we need both is because retrofits are pretty stable. We can get them anytime, and we can characterize the remaining potential by saying, that's what it looks like. But when we're going to try and influence what we call lost opportunities, those things that are in new buildings, new appliances, we need to know what's flowing into the market today, because that might be quite different. If you measure how many LEDs are in houses today and their saturation compared to the penetration in the market as flowing in, completely different answer. 2 LEDs per household. Yeah, but it's 90% of the new purchases. What's a better measure of what you can influence? And why we want to do that. We've been doing this for 25 years plus. We're getting dividends on those old programs, those prior programs. Not old, just prior. I'm old, they're just prior. Collectively, during this last 2.5 decades, almost 3 decades, we've created a new social norm. We've made people think that wasting electricity or natural gas is a bad idea, not just because it's money, but because it's immoral to do so, because of climate and your generations to follow. We've made that message resonate. We've improved codes and standards and made energy waste illegal. And we're creating lower cost technology and building an industry many of you work in that now has a vested interest in pursuing those profitable opportunities. So we've made energy waste unprofitable. We've made those three things I said are the key to success, immoral, illegal, and unprofitable, all part of our deployment. And going forward, that won't change. What we do to administer and to implement those will. We want to be able to measure those dividends, because it's not just what you do today that matters, is you're seeing the results of the programs you operated below these many years. The infrastructure you developed is now out there selling on its own. New lighting systems, selling on its own, variable speed drives. Those entities got created because the utilities underwrit the infrastructure. And we should take some credit for that in what we do, acknowledging that they're changing the baseline against which we perform. And finally, Yoda has some good words for us. New Star Wars is out in a little bit, and I'm done.
Are we live? Okay. Okay, so now's the Q&A portion of your presentation. Tom, thank you very much for the wisdom and the humor all these years. So
We go back a long way.
So the first question is about how vast is the potential for energy efficiency, given all of these trends that you've talked about here today? How much is left, and what evidence persuades you that energy efficiency will continue to be an important and substantial energy resource over the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I'm still alive, right? The basis for my remarks come from the Council's recently completed 7th Northwest Power Plan, which was finished in March of 2016, so pretty recent. We did our regional potential assessment at that point in time, which was finished at the end of 2015. So it caught many of the standards that we're looking at in the development of the baselines. And so when we looked at what was economic to pursue from an energy standpoint and from the capacity benefits of that energy efficiency measures, under 90% of the futures we tested, we met 100% of load growth with energy efficiency, and over 70% of demand requirements. This is after we've already booked energy efficiency in the Northwest over the last 20, 30 years, equivalent to the entire province of Alberta's load. Something on the order of Oregon plus half of Washington's load. We built the equivalent for the Northwest, we think, in terms of dams. We now have built, in energy efficiency terms, the equivalent of the output of the 6th largest dams on the Columbia and Snake River system. So it's a lot. We've stretched the capacity of the river by almost 40%.
And the salmon, thank you.
And the salmon thank us, and the Native Indians thank us for the salmon. And
So what do you see as the biggest threat to that future?
I think there are two parts to that. Complacency, which I wouldn't put in you folks in that class, but there's complacency amongst regulators that things are going to be about the same going forward, and I think everybody needs to give the regulators and the legislative leaders a heads up that there's a lot of potential out there. Just that don't be put to sleep by low natural gas prices. Things change unexpectedly, and there's reliance on a single thing that you don't control is sometimes risky. And I will add, when we did the analysis, if you take the capital cost of a new combustion turbine and run even $3 a million BTU gas through it, you get a pretty high avoided cost just for energy. And we can't say that the market price for electricity is our avoided cost anymore, because the market is not capturing and recovering the capital cost of new generation. It's pretty much a variable cost market. And if you got to build a new generator, you don't price the value proposition at what the market price is, because you have to recover your capital cost. And so don't miss that in the analysis. It's important that both capital and fuel costs be into account. When you look at that, it's in the $70 a megawatt hour range before you add capacity benefits. So, that's assuming you operate the turbine at 90% of the time, which is a pretty high use factor. So this avoided cost can be a problem if you don't look at it correctly and fully.
Great. So you talked quite a bit about new codes and standards in your talk today, and we know that those will change the cost effectiveness of energy efficiency programs. But we also know that energy efficiency in the past has been based on going out and capturing low-hanging fruit or least cost improvements. So what do you think about that? Will the low-hanging fruit continue to grow back? And what are the criteria for declaring success when a market is transformed?
Oh, I have to parse those into two pieces. Low-hanging fruit has a new meaning to me as a retiree in wine country. So I'll set that aside for a moment, but I don't have to show up sober on Monday. So, I did 7 conservation assessments in the Northwest over a span of 30 years. And every time I can tell you that I was surprised that new things showed up. And those were 5 years apart. So over an intervening period, when you thought you knew everything about the future, 5 years out, you turned out you didn't. And we had, in every plan, 15 years out, we ran out of retrofits because we were going to get them all done the next 15 years. And in the 7th plan, 15 years out, we're going to run out of retrofits. So we're not done yet because we're going back and putting in light bulbs where we put in light bulbs 6 years ago. And so, I have full faith that the American ingenuity will continue. As long as there's a waste opportunity out there to deal with, we'll find a technology that's better suited to solving the job. And most particularly because of controls and systems, we're going to turn technologies on and off so that they only meet the needs of the customer at the time the customer has that need. If you think about what variable speed drives do, what occupancy sensors do, what daylight sensors do, they're intended to provide just the right light level and just the right motive force that's needed to do that job at the time it's needed. And we're just beginning to digitize the world to make that happen. And that's where the potential will be huge and where we need to change our program offerings to figure out how to capture that, because it's a unique solution set for each one of the customers that you might have out there, particularly commercial and industrial. But the residential, same way. Why is the TV on all the time when no one is watching it? Why can't it go to standby and come back up? We've done that. Why don't we just use variable speed drives instead of a constant motive if the mode goes up and down? We're delivering motive force that's way in excess of need sometimes and just barely there in others. So it's, when we oversize the motor to begin with to do that. And so there's all kinds of improvements there that we've not touched for 35 years in a big way.
So it just keeps growing back.
So do those grapes.
Okay. All right. In the past, efficiency has been measured by savings in energy, sometimes peak. But there is more recent talk about other attributes of energy savings, including time-based value and locational value. Could you comment on that? Do you see the value of energy efficiency shifting towards counting these attributes?
Yeah, I clearly do. I think from my presentation, I think that in my last comments here, that the network system we have, it's the largest engine in the world, the electrical system. It's the most complex engine in the entire world. If you think about it, it has to turn on power immediately when you turn on a use for that power. In 60 hertz, it's got that solved. That's an enormous accomplishment from an engineering feat standpoint. And there's a value chain in doing that. Every one of those things that turns on sends a signal back to a generator that has that's priced at that time to meet that load. And that generator that generator and the next generator and the next generator after that all don't come online at the same cost. And so we've got to make sure that when we save, we represent the true value of those savings, both from a time standpoint and from a locational standpoint. Otherwise, we're not doing the same thing in valuing that as we would a generating resource that gets valued that way. It gets valued for producing power at the time it needs it, and for providing reserves and all kinds of other ancillary services that it gets priced for. Energy efficiency, demand response can do some of those things, not all, but should be valued for that.
Great. And let's talk about it from the customer's point of view for a minute. As the world changes, how will efficiency's value to customers that it can lower their energy bills also continue to change?
Well, I'm going to depart a moment here. Aside from large commercial and industrial customers, I think most residential and small business customers don't think about their energy bill very much, if at all. And so the value proposition to them is that the lights are on when they want them and the heat pump is working when it's supposed to and they get heat. And when the power goes out, that's the problem. And they're more worried about that. For large folks, it's reliability. I can't lose my chip fab down because the power goes out and I lose an entire production of chips or whatever I'm producing. I think, again, targeting the value proposition to the people who care about it will be different between those customer classes. And on a going forward basis, residential customers may be it may be a bigger sell to them that they're not producing carbon at the other end, and their kids are going to be living in an environment that isn't as hot and as severe. And that may be the bigger selling than the money itself. On the other hand, in large industrial customers where commodity prices is everything, really care about whether it's a tenth of a mil more or less. And that's a different problem statement.
Okay, well, many know you as an expert in how energy efficiency is built into integrated resource plans. So Minnesota does recognize energy efficiency in its resource plans, but it's currently an input, not an output, unlike the Pacific Northwest. How can we change this, and what barriers do you see to changing it?
Well, in order to treat energy efficiency as a resource in integrated planning, you have to integrate it. That's what the word says. And treating it as an integration resource means that you put it in and compete it directly with supply-side resources, and for that matter, market purchases, which supply-side resources compete against, so that everything in the optimization equation is in the equation. If you set it aside as a fixed amount, then solve for the rest, it isn't optimized with energy efficiency. It's just like somebody doing an econometric equation where there's a residual, and the residual is the thing that you just fix. And then I'm going to make this thing go through zero. It's always zero then as the intercept. Well, that may or may not be the appropriate answer. So you need to put it into the integration modeling process in a way that allows it to compete based on its characteristics against the characteristics of the supply-side resources. That's the first step, rather than just take the load down by some amount that you think is cost-effective.
Like the EERS value.
Like the EERS value. And modeling the EERS might be something that you have to do when we call it must-run resources or must-build. Like you have an RPS requirement. In the Northwest, we've got 3 states with an RPS. We must build so many RPS resources. They are fixed in our analysis. You don't get to choose not to build them. You can figure out which ones are the lowest cost to build, but you got to build so much. In the case of EERS in the state, there's a certain minimum that's got to be built in, and then you determine whether or not anything above that level ought to be cost effectively pursued. And that's what we do in Oregon, and where there's an EERS. It turns out that this, as Maureen and I were talking, turns out that the 2 utilities that are covered by the system benefit charge in Oregon found out that they could invest twice what the system benefit charge paid for after they did an IRP, and found out that 2 times as much energy efficiency was cost effective to pursue compared to what was paid for by the public benefits charge.
And they're doing it.
And they're doing it, yeah. More than doubled
Right.
their EE budget.
So you mentioned MNV 2.0 in your presentation. You've done extensive work in the Northwest with utilities, businesses, and other stakeholders on the Regional Technical Forum, which you mentioned. What has been the main benefit of this effort, and has it changed the perspective on the value of energy efficiency in the Northwest?
I'll take the last part first because that's more transparent. It has given it greater street cred simply because the adjudication process of having the Regional Technical Forum, which is a group of 25, 30 folks, publicly review, peer review the work of analysts that work in the back room and make sure that they got it all right, added a lot of credibility to it, not only with the utilities, but with the regulators and with other stakeholders that had more or less skepticism about whether energy efficiency might deliver. So by building it in a fishbowl, it made the outcome more consensus agreement. It takes a lot of work to make that happen, and but that was the basic outcome. It reduced transaction costs at the regulatory commissions a lot, which is always
so
useful.
Extreme transparency.
Extreme transparency. Well, and broad stakeholder engagement. As I said earlier, the RTF has monthly meetings. It has maybe 25 to 30 members at any given point in time that show up for those meetings. But we have an audience watching what they do that's 60 to 90 people that come in and watch sausage being made. And that adds, when you're that transparent about what you're doing and why you made the judgment you did, and you allow anybody to come up to an open mic and complain, you've satisfied lots of the critics that would be out there.
So you talked about this a bit earlier, that we will be moving away from deemed savings towards measured savings. But I thought you had a really good way of expressing that earlier, that it depends on what you're looking at. So maybe you could just spend a minute talking about how you divide that data pie up.
Yeah, I think there's not a one-size-fits-all evaluation technique. And there are some things that deserve highly sophisticated M&V and some things that don't. And you can get away probably with looking at the average performance of an Energy Star refrigerator compared to a standard one and pretty much say on average we're going to get 52 kilowatt hours a year. On the other hand, doing that to a mesh networked lighting control in a commercial building seems insane. And so you've got to figure out what the design problem is for evaluation. In some cases, MNV 2.0 is the best answer, and in other cases, going back to saying, we're just going to say it's a single number, count the number of units that comply with that, that's good. And I think the MNV 2.0 will be best used where there are big stakes on the table where you can afford to develop the analytics. And eventually, with economies of scale, that will get into more and more measures. But at the beginning, it's when big savings and control strategies that change the underlying performance, we're tailoring those kinds of things at those measures, not at refrigerators or shower heads.
Well, and as the software vendors incorporate all those great Twitter algorithms.
Hashtag save.
So last question here. At least some Minnesota utilities, currently including Xcel Energy, have an abundance of capacity and energy resources. However, as more coal and nuclear plants are retired, will energy efficiency have new value as a baseload resource?
Well, it depends on its load shape. Short answer. If you want base load energy, something that looks like an exit sign savings is pretty good. It's on 8760. It's there every hour of the day, whether you peak or not. On the other hand, saving street lighting is great for the nighttime, but not so much in the day. And so it depends on its load shape. If it's base load and matches what the utility system needs, it can supplant existing resources or new, but it depends on its load shape. And so if it delivers during the time you need energy during the day or during the evening, great. If it is only on a certain time of day, may not fit. So we need to invest more heavily in getting the basic empirical data about when things are on and when they're off. And unfortunately, we haven't done very much of that across this country. So that's going to be necessary, and maybe the M&V 2.0 and others techniques will allow us to do that less expensively than we did. So, but I'd say, yeah, it can be a substitute sometimes.
Okay, so for all you emerging data analysts out there, the future is bright. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I don't know if it's fair to say that we in Minnesota have stakeholder envy when it comes to the Pacific Northwest. There's probably a division of thinking about that in the room. But really, I think that the work that you've done, Tom, and the work that has happened with the Regional Technical Forum is really tremendous. So thank you for joining us. Also, CE's Maureen Quaid as the Q&A person. I realize we didn't introduce you, but Maureen's been instrumental on the potential study from the CE side. So yes, I was going to guess which Avenger you were, Tom. I thought Thor, you think, maybe? What do we think? With a glass of wine. That's a good image. So I am going to, I'm going to transition us to our panel, and I might invite our 5 panelists up to the stage. I think we've got some lights for you. Perfect. And so this next phase is just some quicker sort of short feedback, reactions to the keynote, and kind of high-level synthesis of things that our panel has worked on. And then we'll have some Q&A after that. We do have some cards if you guys want to jot down questions as panelists are speaking. I think some of you may have taken cards when you came in, and then we have people circulating, I think, who have those. So feel free to just wave them down, and we'll incorporate those in. So quick introduction, panelists. Thank you. So in order of appearance, first we are going to hear from Aaron Berndt. And Aaron is the head of Central Regional Energy Partnerships at NEST, part of the business development team. Thank you for paying attention to our central region. He was previously at PG&E, where he served a number of program manager roles, including energy information platform implementation. Fun fact about Aaron, he has written 2 children's books, one entitled The Mustache Counting Book. So I think there is a question embedded in that fun fact from one of you. Next, we'll hear from Elliot Crow at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, one of my alma maters. Elliot is a program manager in the Whole Building Systems Department, and he supports technical research on energy management information systems, measurement and verification, commissioning best practices and innovation, and other related areas. So good questions on some of this big data tech stuff that we're talking about. Fun fact, Elliot comes from a town in England where you're not allowed to say the word rabbit. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, maybe you want to address that. I'm very curious which town that is. Thanks for being here. So next we'll hear from Ram Narayanamurthy, and he is with EPRI. Ram's the principal technical leader at the Electric Power Research Institute, and his focus is on energy smart communities and building to grid innovation. Ram's worked on a variety of teams developing new models for distribution planning and thinking through ways to leverage the next era of building design and modulated load shapes. So lots of themes here with what Tom was talking about. Ram tells me that when he files his reimbursements with EPRI, he will have 3 times more plane flights on those reimbursements than hotel accommodations, because there are a lot of red-eye flights in your life, is my understanding. A man on the go. Well, we're happy to be one of those stops, so thank you for joining us. Next up, a local guest, Tim Sullivan from the Wright Hennepin Cooperative Electric Association. So Tim is president and CEO of Wright Hennepin. Wright Hennepin is a 51,000 member cooperative, and it's headquartered in Rockford, so just northwest of the Twin Cities. Prior to joining Wright Hennepin, Sullivan worked for the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, best acronym, NRECA, and Touchstone Energy Cooperatives for 15 years. I've also learned that Tim Tim, when he was 9 years old, won a frog jumping contest. Yes, so it was not Tim himself, it was his frog. So he was sort of the sponsor of the winning frog, which I think is a very important role. So thank you for that. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Sean White from Xcel Energy. Sean manages DSM strategy and financial operations for Xcel. He's tasked with ensuring the long-term viability of Xcel Energy's nationally recognized DSM portfolio, and really they are nationally recognized, and the regulatory compact in which it operates. He's been with Xcel Energy for 15 years. Prior to that, one of his first jobs was to dig through garbage cans, making sure secret information was in fact thrown away. It's very mysterious. So maybe you can all elucidate on those pieces of information and others, and I'll just invite you one at a time. We'll start with Aaron to just come on up, and I think someone has, does he need the clicker? Okay, perfect. Clicker, take it away.
Hi, everyone. All right, so Nest. Nest was founded partly to help drive energy savings. So back in 2011, our co-founders had a big vision on how we can reinvent the smart thermostat and really the connected home space more broadly. But saving energy has been a key theme of why we started and really what keeps us going. So Internet of Things, all connected things, the things of Internet of Things is booming right now. Everywhere. So an interesting component of that is a recent study released by EIA is that smart thermostats are a small component of that. So broadly speaking, only 3% of customers out there have a smart connected thermostat. And when you connect the dots with Tom's speech, smart thermostats are automation control for the residential space. So when you combine those two elements, the market's booming, but not connected thermostats, smart thermostats. Why that's the key reason that we're starting to see a lot of programs all across the country that are treating smart thermostats as their next mega measure. So really replacing a lot of the lighting programs with smart thermostats combined with demand response capabilities, time of use capabilities, so that you really can have that energy savings and time value of energy savings. So broadly speaking, Nest's strategy or connected home strategy is first and foremost to get more customers and having devices on the wall, and then increasing the amount of sensors and devices that they have, so that over time we can be developing better and better services and really amazing sort of overall connected home experiences. And then from our perspective, the energy team's perspective, using that to drive energy savings. So my 5-year predictions from now are 5 years from now, the smart home or connected market will be just much more standard sort of mode of business when customers are out there buying new technology first, and then really being able to drive amazing energy management experiences kind of within that. And third, the capability to connect all of the things will be dramatically simpler 5 years from now. So it's starting to get there with voice, Alexa, Google Assistant, etc. That's going to be many, many times easier 5 years from now. The good news is we don't need to wait 5 to 10 years to start doing these programs at scale, and we have examples that we can be starting to showcase already. So ComEd's Million Thermostat program that they launched a few years ago, they have a target this year to install 100,000 smart thermostats, 150,000 next year. In Ontario, they just launched a direct 100,000 unit direct install annually program, particularly focused on GHG reductions. So these models are already out there, and the good news is they're not complicated to get started. So the main three processes that we think about when we talk about how do we leverage smart thermostats to drive the energy benefits, both from the energy savings and demand savings, are all in place now, and they're just going to keep getting better over time. So 3 basic processes. One is just to offer rebates and or direct install programs to help increase adoption. So simple, easy to use energy efficiency rebates, standard deemed rebates to get customers putting more devices on the walls. A simple way to do that, and we're seeing more and more of our utility partners do this, is just to use Energy Star as that QPL for those programs. Energy Star is performance-based, so it helps ensure that the savings are there over time, and requires each manufacturer to continue to do that. Key difference between a lot of the programs that we're seeing a lot of success now on from historical deemed energy programs are instant validated energy savings, either directly on the utilities marketplace where they can find either purchase and get the rebate right at that, basically checkout experience, or extending that into retail, or on Nest.com where we have a variety of different components to do that through the utility and their partners. We did this with Puget Sound Energy this year, earlier in the spring, and dramatically changed the sort of trajectory of their program from kind of plodding along to 10xing to 60xing some of their outputs. So once you have a whole bunch more connected devices out there, what do you do with them? You, in parallel, enroll them into a demand response program. So basically starting to take that time benefit of the KW delivered to helping ensure that you can actually trim or reduce the KW usage of that AC unit during that high price period. Demand response isn't for everybody, so you'll be able to capture a good amount, and we're working on ways that we can continue to improve that over time with our partners. One, by making it a great customer experience, so customized and tailored to them, not sort of plain vanilla setbacks for everybody, but allowing them to maintain that control. So managing that portfolio of thermostats at the portfolio level, not necessarily at the individual level. For all the remaining smart thermostats out there, we have ways that you can engage the customer lightly with a program that we call Seasonal Savings, where we essentially just push that program notification directly to the device or in their Nest app, which at a high level says, would you like us to help you save more energy? And since most customers bought the thermostat to do that, almost everybody says yes. So you're able to get opt-out style program enrollment rates of 80% and above with an opt-in program. And so you're able to drive an incremental 3 to 5% HVAC savings in doing so. So when you combine getting more devices out there and doing programs at scale on top of those, you're able to do things like SoCalGas enrolling 50,000 customers in an HVAC optimization program in one day. So in my prior life, I spent a lot of years at Pacific Gas and Electric. Some of that was running HVAC programs. It would have taken us a decade to get 50,000 customers enrolled into an HVAC program. We're getting ready to relaunch this program with SoCalGas, and we should double it. We should be roughly about 100,000 customers this next go around. So it's a really great way to have a dramatic impact, again, quickly because of that simplified customer experience. So 10 years from now, my vision and where I think this is all going, particularly with a lot of our utility partners, is we'll be running these programs with flexible load capability, but not on 30,000, 50,000 customers, but with millions of devices out there. So when you aggregate that across that many customers, you can do really great fleet management of load, and it's all enabled with technology that's simple and easy for the customer to use. So that's it.
Hello. If you're curious, I will not be offended if people say rabbit in my presence. And I am allowed to say it away from my hometown. I won't get into that. So I'm here to talk about automated M&V. We heard earlier conversations about M&V 2.0. You hear people talking about advanced M&V. Essentially, it's all the same thing. We're not trying to get too hung up on terminology just yet. Essentially, it's a method, a set of techniques for measuring and verifying savings from projects. I'll be talking about it here today, but it's a technique, but it does show up in software and technology as well. So it's somewhat confused between whether it's a technology or a technique, but it's a group of techniques essentially. The work that I do at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is predominantly on the commercial side, so I think there's an inherent bias in what I'm saying here towards that, but many of the things that I'm talking about here will apply to residential as well. Button problems here. So I just wanted to start, if we're talking about like the next thing, the advanced piece, where are we at right now? So here's typically how programs work in my experience. Something happens at a building. Here's a picture of a man doing it, but it could be a woman that does it, just to be equal here. And then a man or woman will create some savings calculations using perhaps data from the building automation system, manufacturer's specification sheets, etc. The utility would review that and say, looks good, we accept those savings claims. Then the utilities wait. And they may wait 2 or 3 years until an evaluation happens, growing a beard, growing wine, whatever you choose. I don't imagine they do that, but there you go. And then finally you find out, what happened. The evaluators will statistically sample the projects, do an in-depth study, and then you find out what really happened. There are sensible reasons why this has come about, but the obvious gap in this approach is that you have such a long lag between the action and finding out the truth that there must be another way. So how about if you actually look at energy consumption data to see what's really happening? Lo and behold, there are methods established for doing that. The International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, the IPMVP, lays out 4 methods, 4 options that use actual energy consumption data. So option C is the one that uses 12 months of monthly consumption data to establish an energy model which can be used to predict the energy use for a particular facility. Once you have that model established, you can track after a measure has been implemented, and you can actually measure what's not been used. Now, it's an established process. It's been around for a decade or two, but it has a couple of key downsides. Firstly, it's only recommended if the whole building savings are 10% or above, which doesn't affect that many projects. Secondly, you get 1 data point each month. So you may be able to get a sense or a quantification of the energy savings, but you don't really get any kind of characterization of that load. So then smart meters come along, huge investment. I know there aren't massive penetration in Minnesota, but across the nation, as Tom showed earlier, the penetration is very high. And in the same way that smartphone operating systems spurred the generation of a whole host of apps, the availability of smart meter data has really spurred a massive area of research and development, technology, software, etc., that uses this data. I'm just here to talk about automated M&V, but I think we really need to think about smart meters as enablers, of which automated M&V is just one benefit. Button fail. Okay. So what does that look like? If we talk about M&V 2.0, here I've got a few charts here. I just want to show you the kind of work that is being done in the industry right now. What you see on the screen here is hourly energy consumption data for a facility. That's the green chart that's somewhat hidden. Combined with the temperature data, which is there in blue, you develop a model of how this building operates, how much load is created by the external temperatures. That then enables you to come up with a predictive algorithm in orange, which in this case is a pretty good match. So we have a model here which fairly accurately characterizes the energy use in this building. If we go in a little bit closer here, we see a typical day. So you've got a load shape during a baseline period. Then you would have some kind of measure installed at this facility, and then in the post case on the right-hand side of this graphic, you see the actual consumption has been reduced. You can compare that with the modeled value, and there's your savings. So what you're getting here is the ability to detect lower savings. So 5% savings you can detect with these techniques, possibly lower if you have a good, really accurate model. But ballpark, you're getting a lot more resolution than if you're using monthly data. Also, you're looking at the time value of those savings. You can look at every individual hour each day of the year and see how much you're saving and at what time of day. And that seems like a pretty strong theme here today as a big benefit. The third chart here shows the accumulation of savings over a 12-month period. So you're able to see in this chart, for example, there were several interventions. You can see when those happen. You might make an intervention and see nothing happen. So that's your cue to actually respond and react and correct. That doesn't need you to wait 3 years for an evaluation. So there's a whole host of benefits here that can be seen by building owners and utilities and the evaluators. So it's not the miracle cure, however. I think it's really worth noting that these techniques are still in development. IPMVP option C has been around for a couple of decades, but these new applications of those existing techniques using high-resolution data are still sort of in their infancy, and we're trying to have some training wheels on how people actually do these kind of methods. So let's talk about the limitations. We call it automated M&V, but it's semi-automated. Really, you need to invest a certain amount of effort up front to configure, to get the data right, etc. Non-routine events can happen. So things like changes in occupancy or operating hours that you want to cancel out cannot be automatically dealt with these methods. Also, you have to use an existing conditions baseline. If you're using code or industry standard practice, there's no way to automate that just yet. You're looking at gross savings. You cannot look at the net. And also, it's worth just noting that when it comes to evaluations, we're not trying to replace them with M&V 2.0. I think there's a lot of conversations to be had around how M&V 2.0 techniques interact with evaluations. So if Marty McFly was to arrive November 7th, 2022, he's going to find that there have been several pilots across the country that have been completed, possibly a second round of pilots. We have some guidance that's developing and emerging from those pilots. So we're finding out, where does it apply, where does it not apply, what kind of guidance is needed to make sure practitioners can implement consistently. We may have some scaled programs starting. California is certainly pushing pretty hard on these kind of techniques. We'll have established guidelines being honed so they're more consensus-based, possibly in the early stages of some standards around automated M&V. And I think we may find some regulators really looking to push from the top down to encourage these kind of techniques as well. Again, that's happening in some places. In 10 years' time, I think that there are huge leaps that can happen in terms of the technology. I talked about some of the limitations. Maybe they'll be overcome. Maybe there will be more automation, automated techniques to address non-routine events, etc. I think that the more people will be skilled in using these techniques, I think we may have standards in place. So for programs, what this means is you're able to really mitigate your risks, that you're not going to get dinged down the road by evaluations. You're going to be able to look at your whole portfolio of programs and see in near real time what's actually happening at the meter. And that helps you really correct for things that are not going so well. On the planning side, I think the whole topic of distributed energy resources that is coming up a lot today, I think that you can kind of envision that program approaches can be really tailored regionally and time specific. And you can anticipate bottlenecks, etc. And I'm being told to leave. That was the end anyway, but thank you.
Kaylee? So, nowadays when I actually go out to make a presentation, I usually ask my host, can I say the word decarbonization? And I have to thank the audience because I think we are at ease with that word here. But the reason I mentioned that is because I think as we walk through this presentation, I want to remember three themes. One is decarbonization, one is flexibility, and the third is distribution planning. Because when we look at where energy efficiency might be going, I think these are all either costs or effects of where energy efficiency is going to head up. So with that, maybe we'll dive a little bit in. For those of you who don't know about EPRI, let's meet afterwards for drinks. We'll talk about what EPRI is. I'll give you an introduction. But one thing I want to emphasize is that EPRI's research is public benefits research. We are funded by the utilities and by government agencies, but most of the work we do is intended for public benefit. So with that, let me jump into this topic of what we call advanced energy communities. I think what we have been seeing is as the grid keeps evolving into a more customer-centric grid, we are seeing a higher penetration of all kinds of DERs. And yes, energy efficiency is a DER, and we should be considering that as one, along with demand response and PV and battery storage and electrification acts as a DER in some cases, and EVs too. So what we're seeing is as we see more of these technologies starting to penetrate homes, businesses, communities, what we want to understand is what happens when all these things come together. And the other aspect is that we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that many areas are capacity long. One example out west is we have 85 gigawatts of capacity, and the peak load, even on a peak summer day, is about 50 gigawatts. So we have a huge ton of extra capacity, and the paradigm's shifting away from this peak load management. I think except in Arizona, I don't hear very much need for any more peak load capacity anymore. So as we move towards this new paradigm of where the capacity needs are, and we also have this bottom-up effort going on in the advanced energy communities area, it becomes interesting to see how all these technologies can actually help us impact the grid and the network as a whole. So I put this, I sent Megan an earlier version of the slide, and she said, "What do you mean there's nothing in Minnesota?" And she said, "I'm going to send you 5 advanced energy communities." And we put it up there. And my friend Jeff's out there somewhere, but we are also doing some work out in Morris on another advanced energy community, and that's an interesting one because we usually talk about buildings, we talk about residential, we talk commercial, but that one is actually a farm. It's a zero net energy farm. And the interesting aspect there is there's a lot of heat recovery, there's a lot of energy efficiency that's going in, and they're putting in a lot of local generation. So when you think about what's an advanced energy community, it's everywhere. It's not just buildings. It could be a lot of areas where energy efficiency goes in, whether it's agricultural, industrial, commercial, etc. So so there's some. It's very interesting, and ultimately what we want to look at is what happens to the distribution grid when all these different resources come into play. So one of the things is I want to talk about this concept of what I call network efficiency, right? Traditionally, energy efficiency has been doing 2 things: avoiding generation capacity, which is where we get a lot of our ratepayer benefits, and then trying to reduce customer cost, right? But when we look at what we think of as network efficiency, as the energy network changes, as we get more need for flexible capacity, I think there is a need on the transmission side, there's a need on the distribution side, and finally, when we start talking about microgrids or local energy communities, there's a need there. So this is a saying that I heard once, and I really love it, right? It says, eat your energy efficiency vegetables before your DER desserts. Everybody tends to like say, okay, I'm going to put in a lot of PV, I'm going to put in battery storage everywhere, but energy efficiency still remains probably the most cost-effective resource to solve the problems of the grid as a whole or the network as a whole. So why do we focus on network efficiency, right? So what is this? This is actually the measured energy profile of a net zero home. And if you look at it, there's almost no energy use. Energy efficiency has done a great job, right, between like midnight and 6 a.m. And then just in the morning, there's a home that has heat pumps, heat pump water heaters. There's a little bit of load in the morning that pops up. Batteries turn on, absorb some excess generation. Then you get this deep ramp where there's excess generation from the PV. And then in the evening, there's a steep ramp back up. So if you scale that up, this is what we get at the grid level, right? So when there's a lot of solar resource on the grid, it turns out that the shape that we get from these advanced energy homes or zero net energy homes is pretty similar to what we are seeing at the grid. So in a sense, the distribution side is actually mimicking what we are seeing on the bulk grid side. And so we need to focus on some of the same issues and look at how we are actually optimizing our assets
and how energy efficiency can act as an asset on the distribution side. And that's essentially what's happening, which is that there's a lot of supply-demand imbalance. The other interesting part is as we look towards decarbonization, right, there's the other big trend, which is looking at electrification. Because if, I think, Sean, you said you're aiming for like 80% carbon reduction or something in a few years? Okay. So, so when we look at that, yes, there's some discussion about maybe renewable gas, and there's going to be some trials. But at this point, given the technologies we have, I think electrification needs to be a key part of the discussion in that we are changing the metric. The metric is no longer avoided generation. If we change the metric to decarbonization, then electrification becomes another part of the puzzle that we have to fit together. This is actually another interesting graph that we came up with. We were doing emissions, and it turned out that when your grid gets cleaner, in this case the grid's about 44% zero GHG, then you end up with there's substantial GHG reduction in going to a getting away from fossil fuels. Just curious, can anyone guess as the grid gets cleaner when you're going to have highest marginal emissions? Season? Fall, spring, summer? It turns out that the highest emissions are actually at 2 a.m. in the fall. And that's because that's when you don't have the resources, you don't have the renewable resources. So when we're talking about energy efficiency, that's the other piece we have to look at, which is how can we actually, if you're moving your metric to GHG, then how do you actually get your efficiency at those points where GHG can be maximized, right? Again, that's the other part, right? It's the intelligent efficiency, it's the load flexibility. Previous speakers have talked about quite a bit, so I'm going to skip through this. Some examples, we are working in Alabama, so it's not just in the coast. We are working in Alabama. They're building a smart energy neighborhood where they're getting to zero by putting a big microgrid with solar and storage community scale on homes, right? This is another version, 2x6 walls. Another example, we did some work with grid integration of zero net energy neighborhoods. And it turns out when you look at that, energy efficiency does a great job. There's no energy use for most of the time. This is, I think, in the fall, and then you get this needle peak. It turns out that you get deeper and deeper efficiency. Your load shapes change quite a bit. It's no longer a nice, smooth load shape. It's much more of peaks and valleys, which again talks about having the capability for flexibility. But then at the transformer level, it turns out that we actually, energy efficiency does a great job in terms of reducing the peak load of the transformer. It reduced it from about 60 kilowatts to about 30 kilowatts. So the biggest benefit we saw at the distribution grid was from energy efficiency. And the last slide, the last table, what it shows is that, again, when people think about batteries, they think of putting a big battery everywhere. And it turns out controls and batteries, if the control systems on the batteries are not set up correctly, you actually end up oversizing the grid. So again, something to watch out for as I think we have to reiterate that building energy efficiency into buildings, which are probably the only asset that has the same lifetime as grid assets, is probably the first thing we have to do before we start diving deep. I want to go through the use cases. Last thing I want to leave with is we were doing some work with some low-income communities. We walk into a home, and then that guy's power goes out, right? And we said, okay, hey, what's happening? And he's like, and then it turns out that he hadn't paid his electric bill. We said, okay, do you want to pay it? He says, why should I? You guys just gave me a zero energy community. I don't need to pay the bill, right? So there's a big customer education component. As we start moving towards this advanced energy future, I think we really also have to educate the customers on what it means to them and how we progress. So with that, I will leave it.
Thank you, Ram, and good afternoon, everyone. And a special thank you to Chris and to all the CE staff, Megan, Jennifer, and others for your kind hospitality. And at the risk of seeming an ungrateful guest, I'm going to come back to challenge one of the key premises that Chris made his opening presentation. I think Chris already knows where that's going to go. So let me come back to that, maybe just as a dangler, as a scene setter for the rest of the presentation. First, just a little bit about Wright-Hennepin and electric cooperatives across the country. Wright-Hennepin is a not-for-profit electric utility. So we are not an investor-owned utility. We don't have shareholders. We have members, member owners, in fact. And we serve about 52,000 of them in the northwestern portion of Hennepin County and really all of Wright County. We've been in business for about 80 years. And of course, as many of you know, we're part of a much larger network. In fact, a huge one, as you can see by the service territory all across the state. 46 individual distribution systems served by 5 generation and transmission cooperatives serving 1.7 million consumers, 1.7 million. And across the country, we serve 42 million consumers. We serve all or parts of 80% of U.S. counties, 75% of the country's land mass. So when you talk about energy efficiency or really any energy policy goal, it's important, as I know CEE has done today, to talk about electric cooperatives simply because of our size and scale and footprint. In fact, collectively, we're bigger than any other utility in the country. Bigger than ComEd, bigger than Duke, bigger than Georgia Power, bigger than our friends at Xcel. Let's talk about co-ops and energy efficiency and the fact that this is very genuine to us. Think of being a consumer. Everybody here is, but you're also a consumer owner. So we don't have the kinds of consumer shareholder ratepayer conflicts that often are at the center of investor-owned utility structures. Our position from the beginning is cost plus. We deliver the energy you need with a slight cost markup to make sure we're covering our contingencies and then rotate your capital back to you. So in that context, wise use, not being wasteful around energy, has been very consistent with our DNA from the beginning. And I showed you here just a couple of the literally what are almost infinite newsletter and other communication pieces, not just at Wright-Hennepin, but at electric cooperatives really around the state and country prior to 2007. 2007, of course, Next Generation Energy Act. That's why I showed it to you as far back as 2005 and 2006. You have the power to make the difference. So for us, energy efficiency, because we're owned by consumers who are using electricity, want to use that wisely at the least cost, we believe that this is very consistent with part of what we do. One of our cooperative principles, there are 7 organizing cooperative principles. One of them pulled out here is education, training, and information, which is to say one of our goals, one of our charges, if you will, is to communicate back to consumers, policymakers, opinion leaders like the people in this room about the values of cooperatives, one of which includes the wise use of electricity. So we come to this issue very, very naturally. Now, at Wright-Hennepin, how do we express that? What does that mean besides a few nice newsletter articles? Well, there's My Meter. I saw a representative from Accelerated Innovations. So we thank them for their partnership on My Meter and Energy Portal. Not quite real time, but it's downloaded about 24 hours ahead of time, and you can check your energy use and see, did that heat pump go out? What was the impact of my big party yesterday when I kept opening up that sliding glass door and letting out all that cool air into a hot August afternoon? So consumers, to be good energy efficient managers, need to know about what their actual use is. So My Meter is part of that. Energy use consultants, and I should have mentioned, this was an oversight on my part, our key accounts executive is Bob Miller from Wright-Hennepin is here. We have 5 for a utility our size is really incredible. Full-time trained energy use advisors to both help commercial and industrial customers and members use less energy, as well as residential members. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. Wise use. And you could ask them out for a simple issue of, hey, I need to improve my air conditioning unit. I'm looking at a higher C unit. What do you recommend? What do you recommend in terms of a much larger production floor, say, for a commercial business around variable speed drives or lighting or a variety of compressors, a variety of other energy uses? Strategic energy sales rebates to incent not just electric use, but electric use, and I'll come back to this, around technologies that are good for consumers, good for utilities, good for the planet. Lower emissions, higher efficiency, lower lifetime cost. Demand response. Cooperatives really pioneered demand response about 30 years ago. Again, one of the areas where we were among the first leaders. Right now, Hennepin, for a utility of the size and scale that we have, more than half of our members, so 52,000 members, 28,000 are on some kind of off-peak program. That's high penetration. That's a high level of success. SIP rebates, of course, Conservation Improvement Program rebates. Now, cooperatives under state law are not officially under the mandate, but we operate as if we were. We report every year to the Department of Commerce. We take that 1.5% reduction target very, very seriously, both as a spending target and as a kilowatt-hour reduction target, and we have met it every year. Next generation AMI. Cooperatives, this is actually for many, seems counterintuitive, but cooperatives, again, have been leaders in the implementation and adoption of AMI. Now, the reason it seems counterintuitive is why, as a rural electric cooperative, would I do that? And the short answer is because it costs so much to send out a meter reader. If I have very low density, in other words, very few consumers per mile of line, it makes sense to automate and to have technology. So for the number of overall consumers that we represent, there's a very, very high penetration level of automatic metering infrastructure and automatic meter reading in cooperatives. I should mention we just approved our second generation AMI, which will give us real-time data. We think that's important, not just for us to optimize our distribution grid, but as a key information portal for consumers. When you talk about things that incent positive change in energy use, real-time pricing, for example, real-time rates, we believe that consumers have to have the energy at their fingertips to understand what energy they're using and therefore what changes they can make. And finally, we're pioneering something we're very excited about, a WH microgrid at our headquarters, which encompasses about 200 kilowatts of solar arrays, solar generation, diesel backup generation, residential and commercial load control, and the AMI and smart metering infrastructure to manage it all. So again, a good example of where a smaller electric cooperative is leading the way on what the next level of technology integration might look like. So, what's the future of energy efficiency? And this is where I want to talk about the core idea around energy efficiency becoming more about promoting beneficial electrification. So what is that? I mentioned it a moment ago. Beneficial electrification is good for consumers, it's good for the planet, and it's good for utilities. It doesn't set utilities on the opposite side of what their natural business interests are, but aligns them with the interest of consumers and the planet. And in this case, it's higher kilowatt-hour sales. Now, traditionally, this is where I come back to the point I made about Chris. Chris rightly showed the flattening of kilowatt-hour sales, and that is how we've defined success to date in Minnesota, as flat kilowatt-hour sales. We want to challenge everyone in this room to think about that differently going forward. So on some of my other predecessors also mentioned this. Ram, you mentioned particularly beneficial electrification and raised this issue. So what if every Minnesota resident installed an air source heat pump, electric water heating? Now, in fairness to my gas friends, for purposes here, I'll say electric thermal storage water heating to help address that duck curve that you showed, Ram. And electric vehicle charging. Anyone in the room against the wider spread adoption of electric vehicles? It's going to drive up kilowatt-hour sales. It's going to drive them up dramatically. In fact, if we did just those three things, things that are efficient, lower life cycle cost, will drive up kilowatt hour sales double. Double. Now, does anyone in the room believe that's a bad idea if those are the technologies that are adopted? So, we support the SIP goals. You see them in statute. Reduce costs, check. Improve competitiveness, check. Reduce energy imports, check. Cutting emissions. Beneficial electrification accomplishes every single one of those goals. The challenge is we believe we have the right goals. We have the wrong metric. And again, the wrong metric is kilowatt hour sales. So to quote Mike Bull, many of you know Mike at CEE, said, we don't want to incent you to do dumb stuff. Right now, SIP largely is a bet on LED lighting replacements for commercial and industrial members who would likely do it anyway. The phrase, of course, in industry circles is free ridership. Free ridership. We have very widespread free ridership. We think it's time to stop evaluating the programs based on those 2007 realities and reform them for the future. My time is at an end, so I'm going to wrap it up. But let's think about it. Energy efficiency is everywhere, and it's accelerating for all the reasons the guys above talked about. So the future is going to be positive for energy efficiency. That's not the question. We're going to reduce costs. We're going to reduce emissions. How do we measure its effectiveness? The grid is getting cleaner and greener every day. It's more and more a bet on renewables, largely in this part of the country, wind and gas. The grid will be cleaner a year from now than it is today. It'll be cleaner 5 years from now, much cleaner than it is today. In 10 years, it'll be cleaner still. There is no reasonable forecast for the grid that says it's anything other than cleaner 10 years from now. Ram, am I right? EPRI? So let's think about changing how we think about energy efficiency. The most successful sector in the entire state since 2007, by far, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is the electric sector. There is no close second. This is a record of success achieved with the help and support of many people in the room. Policy needs to catch up. We're at the very beginning stages of having those discussions. Let's get there together. Thank you.
So the garbage thing. The one thing I learned while in the military, if you've got a problem, you throw people at it until the problem stops being a problem. And sorting through the garbage for confidential material was a job that I was uniquely suited to. The one thing I'll say is if you're going to throw away classified material, don't write your name at the top. That poor guy had a bad day. So Tim, I should point out I'm a proud accidental customer of Wright Hennepin. And you guys, member, excuse me. I didn't check close enough before I moved in. But I have no complaints. Nice work. I came here today to talk about a lot of things everyone else has talked about. It's incredibly validating. We started talking about this last year and where we saw things going with DSM, some of the concerns. I mean, I'm going to talk about concerns with the future of DSM, but things are going great today. We've got great programs. We're saving historical amounts of energy and capacity right now. But it's kind of my job to look out into the future and say, is this sustainable? Can we keep doing this? What do we need to do today so that we're successful in the future? So maybe I can just provide some specificity without repeating a whole lot of what we've already heard. I started with kind of a provocative title. When I showed this to our program management staff, they got a little freaked out. So does DSM or SIP work in a carbon-free world? Now, we're not at carbon-free. We're moving that direction. We're very proud of our progress in that direction. And as I said, today things are going really well. But there's an underlying economics that allows DSM to operate, societal benefits driven by avoided costs. Those economics are changing over time. Fuel costs, so these are the components of the avoided costs. The fuel, the avoided capacity needed to serve the load, transmission and distribution. And then, some of the questions are, DSM gets compared to traditional resources, fossil fuel burning resources. Should it be compared to renewable resources and the costs of those resources? And so we take a step back and we say, what are the objectives of running these DSM programs? And kind of interpreting the statute as well as, what we believe our charter to be, to save customers money. Can we still do that in the future? Can we reduce emissions? That's part of our charter. And then from a customer standpoint, can never forget about the customer. Does it give them more choice and control over their daily lives, their energy usage? So here's some of the things that we're seeing. And again, the time value of efficiency has been well stated today, and we didn't even collude. So again, very validating. Starting with the bottom chart here. I think there was a laser pointer, wasn't there? Yeah. This is our history, 10 to 12, those 3 years. We spent $84 million. We got 473 gigawatt hours of energy savings, and we produced $285 million in benefits. So benefits and avoided costs, customers didn't have to pay to produce the energy that was saved. $84 million for $285 million for spending $84 million. If you look at current times, you see costs are going up. We talked about low-hanging fruit. It's a little harder to acquire that resource, that efficiency resource. It's a little more expensive. But we also saved a lot more energy, but our benefits went down. So that's a significant amount of energy, additional energy savings for less benefits. And here's what we're projecting and what we're seeing this year. We're going to spend a little more. We're actually going to save close to this area, but the benefits are in half. And then we're expecting the benefits to fall even further. So what's driving, that? Recently, it's the price of natural gas. It's taken a lot of the benefits away. So if natural gas is cheaper, then avoiding natural gas doesn't produce the same amount of benefits. But the general consensus is that the price of natural gas has pretty much bottomed out. So that's likely not going to continue to fall. But the benefits we're predicting to fall. Well, we're adding a whole bunch of wind, and the cost of the wind fuel is zero. And so when you average that all together, with all of the measures that go into energy efficiency, those benefits continue to fall. And that's what we're seeing here. What I'm showing in the top left here is basically, this is the price of energy over time, over a day, let's say. And this is the DSM power plant, meaning this is the load shape of all the measures and when they save energy. We're doing pretty good here. We're doing okay when it's really expensive. We could probably do better. And then we've got this big mismatch. And what's happening is, again, low-hanging fruit. We're going after less and less cost-effective savings. And so we're saving a lot of energy when energy is really cheap. That's an issue. And it's dragging down that average for producing benefits. DSM has always kind of enjoyed that least cost resource status. Well, we're seeing that price get a little more competitive. These are 2016 numbers, different types of generation, and the cost of to produce energy. If we're talking about kW capacity, this chart changes quite a bit. But we're seeing DSM pretty competitive with new wind. So when we talk about being in a resource plan and picking the most optimized source of efficiency or source of generation, we get a little concerned when DSM starts getting close to that wind line. Will it get picked? So what does that mean? We could stay the course. Like I said, things are going well. We plan on continuing to pursue efficiency aggressively. And we'll see those, the costs go up and the benefits go down to kind of a neutral point. And we just don't think that's the best deal for customers. residential technologies, because of that cost of energy and when residential customers usually use energy, some of those measures will no longer be cost effective. And we'll have to make some tough choices about whether we continue to offer rebates for those measures. And then rates go up. You know, if DSM isn't the cheapest option, that drives rates up. But we are taking action. We hope to continue to take action and work with stakeholders to understand this trend more and start looking at incentivizing customers to go after that high value energy. So it's looking at KWH is not always the same. Let's incentivize customers for the energy that is the most expensive. And we can do that. You know, we can change rebates. We can look at measures that more align with when fossil fuel generation is going, which is also the more expensive fuel resource, and try and drive that behavior toward that energy source. Demand response, that's very clearly aligned with where the peak is. Expand demand response. Look at new ways of not just demand response, but demand reduction, load shifting, load shedding, technologies that we can utilize to really hit that peak point. And 10 years from now, we'd like to be able to fully realize kind of that vision in looking at, well, it's the things that everybody else has been talking about. How do we operationalize DSM? I'm trying to start a term of dispatchable DSM, energy efficiency and demand response. How do we use it as a resource? Let's talk about the transition from an intermittent renewable resource to when a traditional resource has to ramp up. There should be an economic value there, and can we use efficiency and demand response at those times, targeted at those times, to levelize, that transition? Geotargeting, avoided transmission and distribution investments. That's another possible value stream. So we're looking at ways to try and stack values in new ways that are more targeted, that are more valuable. I think that's what I wanted to get across. Like I said, it's all been said. I'm so impressed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to everyone. Those were really great and covered a lot of varied ground. So thank you. So we'll go into some Q&A here, and also for the audience, I think we have people with some note cards, so please feel free to wave them down. Bonus points for writing legibly, and feel free to direct your question at a particular panelist. I gave you all a few questions to think about, and I'm just going to kind of throw a different one out there, so you can vote me up or down as moderator in the future. But I think really what was triggered in my mind with some of these kind of universal themes. So first of all, controls. Is that the new plastics? That comes up in a number of ways as we're kind of in each of your work as we're thinking into the future. If we take that as a theme, so I want your feedback on are controls the new plastics? What does that mean for future programs? And as a sub-question, what does that mean for the future workforce in energy and energy efficiency if controls are the new plastics? I'll pick on you if you, yes. Go for it, Ram. Thank you.
One thing with controls, I agree. I mean, I think as we need more flexibility, even when we have devices, the devices have to have better controls, whether it's for electric thermal storage, hot water, heat pump hot water storage, whatever it is, right? The one item I'd always think about is the persistence of controls. Because one of the experiences we had with battery storage, for example, is that if you set up battery storage to optimize for rates, it actually ended up being bad for the distribution circuits. And if you set it up, so it depends on how the controls are set up. And if the fact is that the controls can be changed over the air so easily, right, then how can they be persistent? And maybe that's where MNV 2.0 comes in terms of being able to measure the persistence of controls. So I'd just say that as a warning line. I think controls are critical going forward. but also we should look at persistence of those controls.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Most of my first 10 years of my career was related to existing building commissioning, which is all about optimizing controls. And so I'm very familiar with the kind of challenges you get and how those challenges are resolved. So I think that if you're really looking to scale those kind of practices away from just buildings that are 250,000 square feet, 150,000 square feet, if you really want to hit the mass market, the models for delivering commissioning have not been very scalable. I think that the controls that need to be pushed out there need to have as much self-correction capabilities as possible, self-diagnosis of challenges, because you're adding complexity to the way any building is going to operate. And if it's more complex, that means if things don't go so well, you need to really be able to react and respond, so that the more you minimize the chance that things are going to go out of whack and need someone to actually take a look at them by manually visiting the site, I think that the better you are. And the other thing, well, there's so many things really with building commissioning, but you need to also think about the complexity and the cultural side of that. To convince people to add more complexity to their lives around something which generally they're not predisposed to care about, energy consumption, there's a lot of reticence to going that way. So I think the more you can actually push that cultural side of things, I don't like to say education, it's just a throwaway term that you educate people and all of a sudden they do exactly what you want them to do, and they don't. Cultural changes are different, and so I think that needs some really conscious thinking. And really, if you've got self-optimizing controls, then you've got less convincing to do on the cultural side. So I think that's really a ripe area of technology development.
And for the residential space, we typically don't talk about it as controls, even though that's exactly what it is. So the key component of it for making it successful in the residential space is the automation that's happening in the background. So that's how Nest and Google and others are thinking about it, is how do we leverage the connected home to just automate the complexity for customers, and that's the value to them, and then the benefits back to the utility and the grid are what the outcome from that automation.
You also mentioned jobs, so I just wanted to comment on jobs, and I take that to mean the jobs of the energy efficiency industry, and so I want to recognize that first of all, the market's diverse. Not every customer wants a control that optimizes for energy savings. So there's always going to be an educational piece and an opt-in kind of a situation, and controls are controlling equipment. And so there will be equipment choices, we hope, unless the codes just reach theoretical maximum efficiencies and stop. And so controls also identify issues, and there will have to be people that address the issues that are identified. So I see it as an enhancement to our industry, not necessarily a detractor.
Just another sort of feedback on what Tom presented. I was wondering about the kind of codes and standards piece. So kind of taking utility business model hat off, because I know many of us live there regularly. But just where do you see some of the biggest opportunities still in changing codes and standards to bring up the baseline? Sean, would you like to answer that? No. You moved first, so yeah. It caught my eye.
It's hard to take that hat off.
It is.
I would say that, just personally, I think that there's an attraction to making choices for the customers that we see societal benefit for, and I don't know that that's certainly not the utilities role. And perhaps not the government's role. There has to be choice. There has to be the ability to make the right choice, and that's what we should be doing, is encouraging, people to make the right choice, not make that choice for them.
Anyone else want to comment? Ram, maybe?
So I think, again, going back to what Tom mentioned, right, there's a huge amount of existing building stock, right? So when we talk about codes and standards, it's either new buildings or new equipment or new widgets, whatever it is, right? But there's a huge opportunity in existing building stock that doesn't get addressed by codes and standards. So if we are looking at it from a programmatic perspective, we have to target those areas and see how we can do that more cost effectively. Because we have had so many widgets that we could actually go just replace light bulbs or put stuff up, it's been easy for us not to do the hard stuff with existing building stock, but that's probably where we need to go as codes and standards tighten up.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I was thinking about all the jurisdictions that have introduced benchmarking requirements for existing buildings. There are some places where they've actually introduced retro commissioning requirements for existing buildings and maybe energy audits. So I think that definitely that all those buildings out there need to be addressed. And one of the challenges with requiring an energy audit or retro commissioning is that you're kind of requiring a thing to be done, but it doesn't require the building to end up at a certain level of performance. And so I think that if there could be a bit more thought to really addressing the complexities around, well, what would that look like when you have such a diverse existing building stock, to set certain benchmarks for actual operating standards that you could say, well, you reached that point. No matter what you did or how you did it, you have been required to reach that point and you've been shown to do that.
Great. Let's see. I'll think about who to direct this to, but this question is really about, so connectivity, been a big theme. As we see more of these connected devices and communications, what is the role of cybersecurity? So let's talk a bit about that. So I'm sure many of you think about this regularly. How are we ensuring that we are not opening up vulnerabilities, whether it's from a building system, from AMI, et cetera? So I can.
Sure.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, Nest, and particularly being part of Google, data security and data privacy are really front and center in terms of just our business. So the way that we even think about it is we're a guest within our customers' homes, and if we're not behaving well, they should be getting rid of us, and particularly as a part of security and sort of data privacy. We have very focused and stringent policies around how our programs run in terms of the data sharing capabilities, and really it's around ensuring that we're enabling data needs for M&V, but not just sharing data for sharing data's sake, because that is at risk for utilities if all of a sudden they have all the AMI data and, let's say, the entirety of a connected home kind of existence kind of piped into their system. So we really work to sit down and plan out what are the program's data needs, and then making sure that we're getting all the proper access authority and security around that structure. That's kind of how we think about it.
Anyone else want to share thoughts on the importance of cybersecurity? Yeah.
So,
They usually will.
So I mentioned earlier that we just are starting with the implementation of our second generation AMI. And when the first one went in, say in 2007, it was a power line carrier system. Next one is radio frequency, which is typical now. So a smart meter talks via radio to a collector, which then via radio sends it back to a sub and ultimately back into our SCADA unit. So one of our top 10 criteria was to ask detailed questions of the vendor and evaluate their capabilities in the cybersecurity space. Consumers, I think, are understandably increasingly sensitive about that. The sheer amount and detail and granularity of that data is much more robust than it used to be, so it can tell you an awful lot. And ultimately, our concern is not just the capture of that data, but really the breach of trust that we would have with a consumer who felt that their data wasn't protected. So a long way of saying is it is now I would say a standard level evaluation of any vendor in that space.
One interesting dynamic, since we do work with utilities all across the country and go through those security audits, a part of our processes is also, depending on what data we're sharing, including certain security requirements of the utility, which often doesn't match. So meaning we're going through all these hoops and et cetera, which is a part of our doing business and happy to, but it's not being echoed on the utility side. So it is important to really make sure that the data is protected on both sides wherever it's going.
Without naming any names, right?
Yep.
I have another question here about sort of what access to our technological future. So in particular, lower income consumers. A lot of what we're talking about, smart connected thermostats, sort of access to new technology. How do we ensure that lower income consumers who might not be on the forefront of this are accruing the benefits just as well as anyone else?
So I have some thoughts, but I feel like I was just talking.
You go for it. Go for it, Aaron.
So at the beginning of the presentation, my presentation, I talked about a key component of why Nest exists, and our mission is to drive energy savings. Our initial premium thermostat, the Nest Learning thermostat, did a great job of that, but it is a premium device, so it didn't really fit with low-income or income-qualified direct install programs. The Thermostat E, which we just launched a little bit ago, really is intended to completely open up the market to where that technology is enabled, both in the standard portfolio, but then also within income-qualified programs. So Nest is working on multiple different components to really help ensure that we're able to work with either the utility programs or the government-sponsored programs to enable that stakeholder base. And in California, that's something that's very important as they look across energy efficiency, demand response, upcoming time of use rates, ensuring that they're using their DSM portfolio of programs to serve and prepare all customers for their energy future. So it is definitely a key component as you look across customer base of how are you enabling each.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the charters of the DSM programs, to the extent that they are cost effective and maximizing that cost effectiveness, all customers benefit. So low-income customers are benefiting even if rebates are going to other customers. Now, it doesn't stop there. It's working with the people that know those customers the best, working with the customers themselves, understanding what their needs are, and kind of tailoring programs to that market segment. And I think that's what we try and do today. And so as new technology comes on, that we will continue that effort just with these new technological efforts.
Do you want to add?
So we do work with low-income customers as part of our Advanced Energy Communities work. I'll probably just there's one example we ran into, which is, if you look at the broadband penetration right now, it's about 65% in the U.S., but in affordable housing, low-income housing, it's somewhere around 25-30%. So a lot of low-income customers don't have access to Wi-Fi or broadband. And so when we were doing some of this work, it turned out that, okay, hey, if you put smart thermostats, put hotspots, there's actually quite a good effect, but most of them cannot use it. So one of the things we are doing right now is many of the PUCs they have Lifeline or some kind of a communication program where they have rebated telecommunications for low-income customers, and they're switching that to Android phones from landline phones. So many low-income customers can get, for $10 a month, they get a smartphone and cell service. So we are actually developing thermostats that connect through their smartphones so that we can actually roll those through the low-income programs and enable those customers, because that's their internet access. That's how they communicate to the world versus Wi-Fi and broadband.
Great. Moving sort of to this, so a number of policy issues got raised also in presentations, especially from utilities. And I think good questions, big questions we need to spend some time thinking about. Also just kind of grounding us in technology, the consumer, where trends are right now. We know that efficiency is part of a strong carbon strategy. It's also just sort of a consumer benefit. I mean, there's this sort of inherent desire that all of us share to just stop energy waste. So maybe thinking that the next 10 years are going to involve some changes. What we think of as cost effective today may have new opportunities in the future. I guess what's one of those big energy waste rocks you still feel like we need to turn over and you're hoping technology allows us to? And conversely, what might we be over promising on that we should be wary of?
So I was a big fan of Tom's air conditioning chart of that avoided demand capacity specifically for air conditioner, and that is where we see that value around that time-based aspect of energy efficiency or energy efficiency combined with demand response. And you're seeing different models across the country that are specifically focused on or much more heavily weighted on the KW impacts during peak windows. Specifically addressing that, so Missouri, Arizona, where they're really just shifting from just a KWH program to really focusing on the KW, and doing that, I do think that there's just a ton of upside to really help enable the market to reduce that waste.
Yeah, I'll just jump on board with that. I mean, especially storage, whether it's thermal or electrochemical, has a lot of opportunity to do that. Now, is that saving KWH? It's debatable. Is there an energy penalty and losses and those kinds of things? But is it achieving the policy objectives of what SIP is trying to do? You know, I think so. And we worked a lot on that in the late 90s, early 2000s, and got away from that, you know, with purely KWH goals. And I think there's an opportunity to look at that, to not throw away KWH. You know, we're not dealing in absolutes here. We're optimizing, but there's an opportunity to for, you know, load shifting, storage type technologies.
A yes and maybe. Elliot, any thoughts on kind of big rocks that still need to be turned over, maybe in the commercial building space?
Well, I think in commercial and more broadly, I think behavior-based approaches are still very underrepresented. I think that technology is enabling far more innovative ways to actually influence people's behavior, and also with the automated M&V, ways to actually capture and provide feedback very quickly to people that their actions had an impact. I think that really has a lot of potential in my experience, which has been somewhat limited in terms of actual implementing these types of programs. I think that regulatory structures are not well set up currently, from what I've seen, to actually encourage these kind of programs. They're difficult to measure, they're not that easy to set up and really stand behind, and there's a lot of potential noise. But I think that the technology really is there to be taken advantage of, and that could equally apply to occupants of a commercial building, whether it's through energy saving competitions or plug load targeting. I think that's a real end use that's been under targeted as well. You know, HVAC lighting has been hammered to death for decades, but the plug loads are becoming an increasing portion of building load. And so I think that those two, behavior-based plug loads and the technology is certainly there to attack those.
Great. I want to pivot a little bit. I want to get, since we have this great panel here, I actually wanted to get some of your thoughts around diversity in the energy industry as well. So this came up. Chris alluded to this. I know it's been a little bit of a tough year in tech, especially around gender diversity. There's been some letters I've heard passed around Google and other things. Our industry, I mean, a lot of the themes that we talked about here actually sort of overlap with the tech industry as well, but energy is different. I want to also just take this moment to put a plug. When CE was pulling this panel together, we didn't have a great resource of sort of diverse voices, especially women voices in the industry to pull on, and my understanding is that's now been created, which is great. Some staff, including CE staff and other women in the industry, have sort of pulled together a great resource to look up, you know, who's a leading voice on this issue and things like that. So I think Jamie Fitzke has promised to talk about that with anyone who wishes to be added or to make use of it. But sort of with that context as basis, I think we've got a great opportunity in the energy industry just because we really touch a real diversity of consumers, of technologies. So kind of big perspective from you all on what do you think we're doing well, what do you think we need to do better, and what are any thoughts on kind of action steps to carry that forward as an industry?
I think Chris got it right. We need people interested. We need to be feeding that pipeline. A diverse pipeline of people, and to that, extent, it's getting involved in the STEM programs in high school and college, and pushing some of those things we Xcel Energy itself does, internships and classes and those kinds of things at power plants, just to try and make things a little more exciting, to draw a more diverse group to the industry, so that they can start gaining that experience.
Power plants are
experts.
exciting.
They can be, until you have to clean them. And then, I'm on the board of the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and this is a board objective for this year, is how to better represent society within our industry. And it really has, so far, it's a work in progress, and we're trying to take those action steps. But that has become clear. It's that feeder, and getting people interested, and changing the way people think about our industry. So we have to make it exciting. We have to make it something that people want to be a part of. And I would say that right now is the time to do it, with all the focus on the energy industry.
So I've been in the industry for 8 years now, and I actually think I have a pretty skewed experience in the opposite direction. So my team is a fairly small team of 7. 4 of them are women. They're fantastic. And even within Nest, and certainly within Google, it's definitely a big sort of tech initiative to broadly more expose. But our team at Nest just happened to get stuck with a central region male partner. But even before that, at PG&E, my prior life was in aerospace, and my company back in Denver, when I was a part of, was almost entirely male. So over 1,000 employees. I think there was a handful of women. When I joined PG&E, every single boss of mine, and I had 8 to 10, with the exception of 1, was female. So there really is, at least in parts of the industry, they're there. I think we actually need to be showcasing it a lot more. And so PG&E's recent selection of Geisha Williams as the CEO, I think, is starting to help demonstrate that leadership.
Great story. Yeah. Any other thoughts on opportunities? I have questions about consumers that are piling up. So this is everybody's favorite topic, I know. So in terms of kind of the consumer question, I think that we know that they're really central to this future. They just do not care about energy as much as we want them to, as much as we try to change that. So if you could sort of, paraphrasing questions here, but if you could sort of wave your magic wand and make consumers care about one thing, and that is going to be a real gateway into the energy future, what would that one thing be? And feel free to interpret consumers.
Yeah, so I think consumers do care. And I guarantee you, once we raise rates, consumers care, or if their power goes out, they care. Or if they had a rebate that is no longer available to them, they care. The issue is how to engage them. And what's really interesting to me is we talked a lot about controls, but I believe a central avenue for doing that is actually information. If you're a consumer in a home without an energy portal, and it's 6 o'clock at night, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, actually, in MISO, and the grid is peaking, how would I know that? How would I know that? I have no connection to that. And even if I did, I wouldn't know exactly what I needed to do to make it better. So I actually believe information is the key to do that in some kind of easy way. Now, AMI, as was said earlier, is the enabling technology. Well, I think that works for a certain segment of consumers, kind of high threshold, high interest, ready to engage, but we still haven't provided all the tools we need to there, which is why I start with that, AMI and information and some ability to pull it right up on my phone. Here's exactly my energy profile at this time of day. But second to that, I think is we haven't talked enough about it, but was talked about in the keynote address, is really the grid optimization. There is a really extensive debate right now about, do we stop trying to engage consumers at the level of behavior change and really focus our efforts, as you saw, on appliance standards, building standards, new technology adoption, like, say, an AMI or a whole range of others, and then grid level changes to really get at the next level energy efficiency around banging our heads against the wall. And it's an interesting debate. So I think we have to do both, but I think it starts with information. Consumers can't respond to information they don't have. They can't act on information that they don't understand is in their own interest. I think we like to challenge because we get frustrated they're not engaged with a utility program. I wouldn't be either if I didn't know its impact about what that meant for me at a particular time that I started my dryer and my dishwasher and I lit up my house and my AC was peaking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But if I did, that would have an impact.
So I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over. But it's really about automating it for customers. So we do see that customers care about their energy usage. When we survey all of our customers regularly, the number 2 reason that they buy our thermostats is to help save energy, whether it's for themselves or for the climate. The number 1, just in case you're wondering, is just being able to control it from your phone, so remotely. So we actually view our customers as hand raisers for additional energy programs. So they either went out and bought it because of the rebate or they got it because of the rebate. But because they do, they're interested in more. It just has to be very simple. So I actually spend most of my time trying to reduce complexity of programs to really make that a simple one-click experience for customers. And the way that we talk about that is automation for customers is just do it for me. They're very interested in it. They just want it to be handled. They don't want to kind of sort through all sorts of stuff, go fill out a complex form, et cetera. So it's really more about how can we create very simple and elegant enrollment and program experiences to deliver the value to them that they want to maintain and engage.
I think Tim's point brought up something to my mind, which is we have this program called the Flex Alert program, which is completely voluntary. All it is a bunch of messages that come out saying, hey, the grid's going to have a emergency, right? And I think something like 20% of customers in California respond to the Flex Alert. There's no rebate, there's nothing. It is just bringing that awareness, sending a message through the smartphone, and maybe sending like 2 things like don't run your appliances or turn up your thermostat, some simple things that they can do. And that's pretty effective. I think that's the simplicity of messaging and being able to get to them. The other thing I've heard working with some of the builder partners is quality of life. You don't sell efficiency, you sell better quality of life. When they are selling to a 36-year-old mother of 3, right? It's always, okay, how am I going to make your quality of life better? You put better insulation, you get your house tight, and now the house feels more comfortable. So that's the other aspect of reaching out to consumers and getting them engaged, selling them on something that non-energy benefits of energy efficiency.
Go quick, yeah.
Just quickly, so I work from home every morning. I close my office door at 8 o'clock to avoid the chaos of my wife getting my son's shoes on to get him out the door. And so 8:15 or so, door slams, they're away, and I know I get up, I walk through the house and turn off every light that they've left on throughout the house. So if I could wish for anything, it was to reach those 2 consumers and have them switch off their own lights. Would be heaven.
I think Aaron can solve that problem for you.
Working on it,
Just quickly, we are really at time, but just kind of final, maybe 1 or 2 word answer from each of you. Do you think we have succeeded in making energy waste immoral, or do we have more work to do?
No.
Yeah, I think we have more.
More work.
More work.
I read an article the other day. It was about, I forget the catchphrase for it, but this practice of, in some places, people who own trucks are attaching devices to their exhaust that rolling coal, So it adapts their truck so it spews out unfiltered black smoke. It kind of has the system that cleans it and then makes it dirty again so it comes out smoky. So I think we need to reach those people.
I hate to leave us with that image. And apologies that I did not get through all the questions, but please come to the happy hour to ask them. One more round of applause. Thank you so much to our panel. And I'll just invite you to stay sitting up here for a minute just while I close out. I want to give a couple of other thanks to our team. So please, 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 thank you to all of you for coming, and please stick around for the happy hour. Thank you to our team, really the CE Communications team, Tim and Emma and Ashley and Bruce and all of you guys for helping, Elena for keeping us on time. I want to add, hope you'll join me for a minute in adding one special thanks as well to this, which is to Megan Hoy. If I could just embarrass her for a minute and invite her up. So many of you know Megan. She has been really instrumental in CEE's forums and as engagement manager for us, trying to have these types of conversations, informed but good back and forth conversations, and she's really helped CEE build this area of work. So we're grateful to her. She also has a lot of demands on her time, and she's good at many things, and so her role at CEE is evolving to take on additional work that she has, and so she's going to be sort of stepping back from this role on the panel. So I wanted to officially thank her for this and all the others that she's helped us with. Thank you.